Hi, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. What a great way to start the day.
Indeed, amazing way to
Okay.
start the day.
And thank you
Um,
so much. Thank you so much for making time. I'm looking forward to it today.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's unclear if we'll do two verses or one today. So I guess you could start by reading two, and we'll see how far we get.
Yeah, so just before we got on the phone, just before we jumped online, I was reading chapter 4 verses 1 to 6, right? And it seems there's some of the differences between temptation one. So temptation one was in the desert; it was to convert stones into bread, and the desert is barren, right? The temptation two is the holy city, the holy pinnacle. I mean, it's you, it, like, it's all holy, the holy city, the holy pinnacle, and he quotes scriptures. So if you were to summarize, so I'd say in one sentence, this is temptation one, this is temptation two, or is temptation one focused upon this aspect, and temptation two focused upon this
You're
aspect? What?
asking your famous question of the three temptations versus two temptations in Luke versus one in Mark.
Okay.
What are the differences? And I think this is a massive scholarly debate. I think we're proposing our own answer. But for me, the first one is about will he use the physical world to serve himself, which is one of the things that kings do, one of
Hmm.
the faults that they make. And the second one, we haven't seen his answer yet, but it seems that the idea is will he change the physical world in order to allow him to feel protected. The first one is allow him to thrive, and the second one is to allow him to just do whatever he wants. Jump off a mountain. One of the things that we see in you mentioned yesterday, Ecclesiastes, is
Hmm.
that King Solomon kind of wanted to try everything because there's this idea that a king should have the full range of emotional, and intellectual, and psychological pleasure. And therefore, only once you experience all those outlets will you be able to have a fully objective decision. So it seems like the devil is trying to stretch him in each of these ways. The first one, change physical reality into bread, make the physical world serve you. The second one is if the physical world tries to hurt you in any way, make sure that you can transcend that you can't allow the physical world to do anything to you. So both of the first two tests, at least, I see in a very good Christian way that will you control the world around you, or will you be part and parcel of it?
Thank you. So, if you could clarify, right? So, we mentioned King Solomon that as a king, he wanted to use his mental, emotional, psychological aspects, or he wanted to use them to its fullest to know to come to a point. Now, isn't that part of human life? Isn't human living to use to experience these faculties to its fullest to come to be? So, I didn't quite, I wasn't tracking what you mentioned about
Well,
Solomon.
Ecclesiastes, it seems, again, just we're just doing this as a point of comparison. There's many different ways that you could come to truths. You could experience them through firsthand knowledge. You can learn them through secondhand knowledge of other people's experiences. So the basic premise of Koheles, of Ecclesiastes, is that he has the financial well-being in order to kind of dip his hand into every bucket and therefore personally evaluate through firsthand experience all the different possibilities of how one can live either, let's be honest, a holy life or a depraved life.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you. So this is verses 7 onwards, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's 7. Okay. The Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 4, verse 7. Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test."
Okay, so I like how you put the stress on the word again, noting that it's an unnecessary word. If anything, it's implied from the Jesus perspective that I'm presenting a very similar counter argument. I think that's the context of again, and it's really interesting if you talk about the Bible and the 24 books of the Bible and the different arguments or counter arguments that Jesus can make. What we're going to see is the first two responses are biblical verses, and the third one is a biblical verse. All of them from chapter 6 or chapter 8 of Deuteronomy. So I don't, you were asking how much they know different books. So Deuteronomy obviously was a fan favorite. And it's interesting that of all the places he could have cited, he specifically cites Deuteronomy. And a lot of times Deuteronomy has a little bit different relationship. to the rest of the Pentateuch than the other 4 books. Just as a simple example, there's one of the commandments in the Bible. It's called Hakel. It's a commandment when the king goes on the first day of the Sukkot Booth holiday after a 7-year Shemitah cycle and reads the book of Deuteronomy to the people. So I think like that's one of the things that a king does. And I'm not saying that there's meant to be this monarchical parallel, and that's why Jesus is specifically citing these things. I think it just would have been like more on the tip of his tongue. But it's interesting that of all the verses that could have been cited, they're all Deuteronomy in the same beginning of the book, same section with Moses kind of telling people how to live a good life.
Yeah. So can we take a step back and look at the temptation and what options he had? So the temptation was, here's the temple, go fall down. And if you fall down, because the verse says that God will protect you, that nothing should happen to you. So from there, right, he could have done that. He could have fallen down. Either he could throw himself down and expect angels to come and catch him, or he could have thrown himself down. The angels didn't catch him. Or he threw himself down, or he could say, I'm not going to do what I'm going to do. Are these the only options? So you think this also, or to that question, what are all the options Jesus had? And if you could again explain how this.
So yes. So let's just for example, Catholics will take these very, very literally. That this literally happened. That Jesus went to the. So, it's definitely a question about how literal these are meant to be and what they're meant to specifically accomplish. I think you and I at least have to take the possibility, especially when we think that a lot of people cite this as a Q document, as it doesn't really parallel perfectly Luke and Mark. What if we take a step back and say, at least propose the possibility that one time, some point between 0 and 20, Jesus was very hungry. He was famished, he was starving, and that was a test for him. And another time, he had a question about an injury he had and how that was meant to impact his ideology. And the third one, which we're going to see, is about power, where he had a question about how powerful it should be. A lot of times, biblical writers and holy book writers will reframe a very personal existential question that someone has in a divine perspective. So I think the fact that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, would have been pushing Jesus to do something very easily could have been reframed as a devil tempting him. And I think that's at least a possibility.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I've always wondered, right, when Jesus lived on this earth for the 3.5 years of work he did he ever fall sick? Did he get a cold? Did he have did he have different? People have different body ailments, right? And what did it look like? Did he use his miraculous power to heal himself? I can't say that I'm healthy. I had the same health every day, or I'm healthy at all times, right? Life goes through seasons, and the body has its own wear and tear, and but the Gospels don't give, they don't provide any information as to his physical ailments, if he had any, and even if he had, right, how he viewed them, and even the disciples, right? There were 12 of them. 12. How many of people around him? Like, there's no mention that he healed them. He healed the people around them. But what about his disciples as they moved from places? Like, did they use this miraculous power? If the miracle workers by God, they had a miracle worker, did they use them on themselves to protect themselves?
Yeah, it's from my perspective, these questions all come up in the movie Dogma, right? Where Dogma, he goes, do you know what it was like for Jesus the child? Do you know what it's like for these 10, 15 years? And a lot of times we don't really have an insight. And I would argue we purposely don't have an insight because it's not viewed as part of what we call like eternal knowledge that we need to know for all eternity. So for example, Abraham, we're not really given any insight into him for the first 70 years as well, for the most part. And a lot of it is just stories that coincide. And a lot of times, in the end of the day, there's only so much one could write and have recorded and be passed on from generation to generation. So I view these omissions as purposeful, and because they would have been meaningless to understand the ministry of Jesus. So therefore, these three specific temptations by the devil, I think, are inherently, infinitely more meaningful for how Christians are meant to understand themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have the idea of do not put the Lord your God to test. So again, Jesus specifically answers with a verse, very holy guy, the best thing you could ever do in life. If you could answer everything with a verse, that would be like the best possible thing, right? Any question, would you like an orange juice? Yes. Now, over in Deuteronomy, it says orange juice is the way of God. If you can answer every single thing like that, that would be
Okay,
the
so
best offer.
is this a part of the Sophist hat? Like, how does this verse answer the question of fall down and throw yourself down, and God will command His angels. God will command His angels to bear you up. Yeah,
Right.
concept.
So also, if you look at that verse in Deuteronomy, I know in front of me, but it also it's a section about, don't test God, don't put unnecessary tests. And I think when we talk about the concept of testing God, it's inherently a tough concept to even think about. I think when we think about God testing us, it's very clear. It means that there are challenges in our life and we're supposed to grow. But when we say don't test God, I don't know anyone who really does that. Who goes to say like, well, if God really loves me, then he'll make me a millionaire. It just doesn't seem that anyone who's normal believes that's the way the physical world works. So it's definitely very good advice to not test God, but it's also kind of questionable about its inherent meaning that who does that? I think over in Deuteronomy, when it talks about it, it's really talking about almost rhetorical, saying, by the way, when you sin, when you do horrible things, you're testing God, and you don't want to live that kind of life because you're going to lose in the bigger picture when that happens.
Is this Deuteronomy 6:16? You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him in
Yeah,
Massa. You shall diligently. So,
because
so
in that section, Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu is just kind of teaching the Israelites about how to have like proper behavior and how to make sure to follow the commandments. So I think like it's really hard to. I don't think there's anyone who's really going out and saying, "I'm going to test God. I'm going to put $1 in the street." There's a famous story. I don't know if you heard this, where like someone gets out, like they hear that America is like the golden nation. So and there's money lying in the streets. And the first person who gets off the boat sees like a $50 bill on the floor and goes, "Oh, I'll start tomorrow."
yeah.
Because like this idea that, God, if God cares about me, he'll take care of me on an individual level. And I think even when we talk about like a multiverse and the way that
Yeah.
God is caring about it in this world, it's really hard to argue that every single point is getting taken care of.
So let me ask you this. Isn't this temptation, right? This could be interpreted to mean as in testing God. It says, if you are the son of God, throw yourself down, blah blah blah. Jesus could just ignore that, right? I mean,
Well,
there is no, yeah,
all three
there
of
is
the
no,
temptations he could
yeah,
ignore, right?
so there is no need for him to respond to this temptation, or to the statement put by the devil. So aren't all these three, the way it's worded, right? If you are this, and aren't these a form of testing God?
I mean, the only perspective I think I have on this is that specifically, I think in John, we see that the devil is viewed as like the person, the angel who's in charge of the physical world. He kind of is like the king of the ups and downs of the vicissitudes of this world. So it could be that when the angel is like addressing Jesus, it's not really practical to not answer. Jesus can't opt out of the question as you and I are suggesting. He's forced to engage the question because of the power that the devil has in the physical world.
Okay, so how does this verse answer this question? How
Well, it's
does
really
this
interesting.
verse?
Again, this verse is kind of taken out of context. It's really nice the way it's being used, but the context is like the Israelites did many sins when they were in the desert, when they were traveling between Egypt and Israel, and they had 40 years of mistakes. And Moses is saying amongst one of the mistakes you made was at Massa, one of the places that they stopped. So in Exodus, I think 17:5, it mentions that they were getting punished and they did things at Massa, and it's saying don't test God as you did at Massa. So over here, it's just saying don't test God. So the import is that there are different times when the Israelites test God, but only by sinning. It wasn't a direct test of God, of his love or his care. It was, I sinned. So the parallel between what's happening at Massa in the desert and what's happening at Devil in, let's say, in Jerusalem is not exactly parallel. They're kind of misusing the word test in this context. unless you want to say that you take this very, very non-literal sense that really the devil is just the person inside of Jesus and his evil inclination, just like that's how the Israelites were in the desert. That makes sense?
No, not really. I mean,
Okay,
I can't say I'm following you.
okay,
So this is not so much a verse as much as it's a common truth which people would have known, right? The way you explained, man shall not live by bread alone. Like that's a common truth, which it's a form of truth from Deuteronomy. It's embedded in a verse.
I
In
mean,
a
I don't
similar
know.
way,
It's
so
unclear about how you're arguing that it would have been like a popular adage that was said by people walking the street. And, we don't know. It could be Jesus just an expert interpreter of Deuteronomy.
yeah. So on the topic of it's if you were to go back to to Deuteronomy 6, right, when they were in the desert, they didn't have food, and they doubted God, and that doubt is a form of testing God, right? So you're saying that's not a form of testing God,
No,
that
we're saying that's exactly the point. That testing is used ambiguously here. I think when I think to test God, it's an idea that I'm going to jump off the cliff and see if God helps me. That's how the devil's using it. But the way that testing God is used in Deuteronomy and Exodus is that I sinned. And the very fact I'm sinning, that's against God's hegemony. And therefore, I'm testing God. So it's like it's two steps to get to the testing of God by Deuteronomy, where it's only one step in Matthew.
Okay. So does this verse, so is this form of sophist where it turns the question on its head, or I'm still not connecting the dots between the question put forth by the devil and the answer given by Jesus?
Okay, so the question is, as we mentioned yesterday, that this psalm was used not only in lots of prayers, but it was like the one-sided that God could heal, that it was used in amulets. So his response, I don't feel this is like a super deep answer. It just seems like he's saying to the devil, you misunderstand the nature of God, and it's not the way of humanity that they're supposed to sin or put God to test in order to prove their belief system. So it does seem like let's imagine this is a literal story. It sounds like Jesus would have died that he jumped off the building, right? The test is that, well, Jesus believed in himself so much that he would injure himself and die. And Jesus said, like, I understand physical world enough to know that that's not the way the world works. And if I jump off it, I will die. And there's punishment and causation and reaction for my actions. So the devil was really just wrong. So if you're a son of God, and then Jesus says, no, that is not how the world works. So this one doesn't seem to be like turning the question on his head like the first one does, but it does seem to be a very direct answer saying, devil, you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of how God protects me, and I'm aware of that.
So, okay, so in terms of the devil's questions, has he learned anything from temptation 1 to temptation 2? It sounds like I get the impression.
As the devil?
Yeah.
Again, like, I don't view this as a learning process with the devil, though I'd be happy to entertain that possibility.
Let me put it this way. So is this question about a deeper question? Is temptation 2 much more deeper, or deeper in the sense that so we discussed that it's different, right? It's different as in will he use his will to protect himself. Apart from different in kind, is it also a difference in degree? Like, was this more powerful or much more difficult than the first one? Or you say they're all just the same kind, they're just a different kind of temptations, and each one?
Yeah, I view them as different kinds of temptations. Obviously, there's a lot of literature about the different kinds. Even some people, when they look at this one, they see maybe some of the tests that the Israelites were going through in the desert. Maybe Jesus is kind of retracing their steps and trying to going through that as well. But I don't see any necessity to say something like that. I feel that each one is just qualitatively different.
So you're saying that you're saying that it's not so much a progression of the temptation; it's more just a difference in kind, not so much a difference in degree.
Yeah, again, like I view the temptations as meant to teach Jesus how to understand his own ministry. So yeah, I view each one as like a test for him just like Abraham was forced to go through 10 tests.
Okay.
And each one is meant to help you grow. Okay. Well, Isaac, I think on that note.
Rabbi, on that note, thank you. Have a great day. Thank you. Enjoy your vacation.
Thank you.